but we're
Good
going to
morning.
get 15 minutes at the end for questions.
And welcome to the second to last session of Dreamforce. I can see by the number of empty seats here that we've pretty much exhausted you all. In fact, there are plenty of seats. If you want to come and join us in the little congregation up front, you're more than welcome. And in fact, I think we have enough seats. If you want to take one of these on stage, you're welcome to do that as well. My name is Drew Alexander. I'm a customer success manager with Salesforce.com. And today we'll be presenting on how Salesforce manages CRM and platform change. Joining me today will be my colleagues Randy Edgar and John Beatty. And they're going to be speaking in turn about their elements and how we manage change in the application. You probably can all recite this by heart by now. This is our safe harbor statement. If you want to read this in any more detail, we invite you to go to salesforce.com/investor and read all the fine print. So for how many of you is this, does this actually feel like your job, where there's so much going on, so many things that come your way in terms of change requests that it just feels a little bit overwhelming? All these things coming your way, and you've got to figure out how to manage this tidal wave of change, right? That tidal wave can basically consist of the minor changes, things like, hey, this record should belong to me. I'm now the sales rep on this account. Can you change it to my name? Or, hey, we're missing a field value in a pick list. Let's get this thing added, right? And sometimes those changes come to you, and it's just an email, or someone will shout it over the cubicle wall or whatever. And they seem easy enough to do, but there can be a lot of them, and trying to prioritize them and get them done can be a bit difficult, especially when mixed in with those minor level changes, the kind of things that you can typically do in just a few clicks. There are some of the more major changes, like, wow, we really need to integrate Salesforce with our ERP system. We need to develop a process and automate it in Salesforce for contract management, or something that's going to involve a lot of steps and so forth. Those you can't just say, yeah, let me do that for you right now, right? And also, how do you prioritize those things, especially if you have many of them? Or things that might get even more complicated, where you need to invoke things like Apex and Visualforce and development efforts to get something built out, right? So how do you take all these things, prioritize them, get them done, make sure they have the appropriate level of review and governance so that they get done properly? And of course, add on top of all that just the sheer volume and quantity and scope of all the kind of changes that you're being requested to make. There's all the process challenges, like how do you create a framework around all these changes requests that you're getting so that you can process them efficiently, communicate back to your people that they're being worked on or that they're not being worked on, that they're completed, etc. How do you maintain compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley? How do you prioritize things? How do you balance the requests that you get from all your end users versus what I like to call the drive-by, which is when an executive comes by your desk and says, oh, by the way, we really need to do this. And that usually, if it comes from a high up enough person in your organization, you don't really make them follow a formalized process. You're like, oh, yeah, sure, we'll get that done. Let me put that on the list for you, right? So in this presentation today, we're going to be giving you some of the techniques that we've developed here at Salesforce, both processes and tools that have worked for us, and we hope that some of them will help you as you try to come up with a change process that works in your organization, hopefully to get you from that tidal wave to something resembling smooth sailing. So just to give you a little bit of background about the environment that we work at Salesforce, you can see just from some of the stats that we've got up here on the board here, we've got a rather involved implementation, you could say, with 4,500 users, approximately 100 million records in the application, with over 300 custom objects and over 50 installed applications, 19 languages, all these currencies. And look at all the things that we manage on the application. I mean, it's all the things, of course, that you would expect, like SFA, marketing, customer service and support. But then there's a lot of things that, well, you might also expect this too, but there are a lot of the things that we tout in terms of native applications and Force.com apps. Things like the way that we manage our vendors and our partners, the way that we manage our time off requests. So if you're going to go on vacation, you log that in the app. You get the approval from your manager in the app. Integrates with our HR system, right? So all these things we're managing in our org, even Dreamforce itself. The session that you're in here today, we put in our Salesforce instance with the title, the abstract, the speakers, the room, everything we're handling in the application. So you can imagine that with an application that's this dense with stuff in it, that you have to have a pretty good process to manage all the changes that are being requested from all the various users, all the various systems that are residing in that application. So as a customer success manager, my role in our organization is to help our customers, you, be successful with the way that you deploy Salesforce, to get as much value out of the application as possible. And one of the things that we always tout with our customers is the concept of these 7 domains of success. And this slide isn't here to go through all 7 domains, but to point out that one of those key foundation points for having a successful deployment is about having a good process for sponsorship and governance. Without that, you're not going to have the appropriate level of backing for what you're doing, and you won't be able to manage all the change requests that you're getting in a way that's going to make sense and help you move forward with the business. One of the critical things for effectively managing your process, through a good framework for sponsorship and governance, is to have what we call a center of excellence. It's basically, you could call it a change review board. It's basically the people whose responsibility it is to evaluate all the change requests, to build a partnership between business and IT to get things done, to have a level of executive sponsorship to help prioritize when things are kind of on the fence between 2 or 3 different projects. Usually your executives can weigh in and say, no, that's the top one. That's really ties in with our key objectives for the year, that sort of thing. So having that center of excellence, and it could be something where you have representation from various parts of the team, you have an executive sponsor, you might meet weekly, you might meet biweekly, monthly, it doesn't matter, as long as it fits with the kinds of, or the frequency of changes and that you need to manage, and that you get all the right people together to get the right kind of buy-in to make those decisions and move forward. So the other thing that's really important about sponsorship and governance is the concept of release management. I like to think about the ways that the kinds of requests that you're getting can fall into kind of 3 buckets, and they go along these 2 axes of the level of effort that's required to make that change on one side, and the scope, like the number of users that are impacted, the number of groups that are impacted, and the level of security that you have to take into account when you're looking at making some of these changes. So, when we kind of looked at that first screen that was talking about those minor requests, like, hey, can you change me to be the owner of this record, add a data validation rule, things like that, you could consider those things that would be a very low level of effort and also a very small impact. Put that in, no one's going to complain. You may not even need training to know that that field was added or that thing was done on the application. So typically those are what might fall into that bucket of immediate releases, things that you can just do as soon as you get that request, process it, you're done. And then that next layer is that minor release, the kinds of things that, hey, they might affect more than just you. Right? They might affect the whole team, the whole company if we put that thing in there. If you change your opportunity processes and change the stages, that's going to affect some people. You don't just do that without reviewing it. But it may be still minor enough where you can review that in your next governance meeting, get it done. And then the third level, the kinds of things that might have a big impact to security in terms of who gets to see those fields, who gets to create those objects, et cetera, who gets what kind of effort's going to be involved, from the level of difficulty in bringing that solution or that request to light. Those are what you might call the major releases, and those might have to go through many teams and get a lot of buy-in, that sort of thing. So when you think about creating various processes to manage change in your organization, think about those kinds of strata for the way that you would kind of triage your requests and put them in those kind of buckets, because they might need a different process to manage them. So within our organization, the folks that I've got here joining me today for the presentation are going to talk about the most complex, those major changes, right? How do you take something that might come from an operational team, like in my case, the customer success managers at Salesforce.com, and if we've got a major request, something that goes beyond just our team or just beyond our skill level for being able to administer, or permission set for being able to administer on the app, it needs to go, in our case, to Randy Edgar's team, who manages our IT product management group. And then once they develop it, it will go to John Beatty's team in application support, which are basically the system admins for all of Salesforce.com's instance of Salesforce to actually implement it in production. So if we look at this in a little bit deeper, this is the way we're organized from a people standpoint. If you look along the top, all those bubbles there represent the various operational groups within Salesforce. And the one on the right, CSM Ops, that would be my team, right? All the customer success managers and our bucket of changes and requirements that we need. And the way that we work is all these operational teams act as aggregators of requests that need to go through that major process, and we in turn go to a point person within Randy's organization to get those changes made, developed, et cetera, and then on to John's team in administration and support to get them into production. But if we back it up a step further, if you look at what my role is, not only am I a customer success manager at Salesforce, I'm also one of those operational leads. I've been, I volunteered to say, hey, yeah, I'll take care of acting as a representative for our team to take these things up the food chain. And I'll also act as a delegated administrator to do the things that we can do ourselves in the objects that we manage ourselves. So as an example of that, as a customer success manager, we have a custom object that we've developed in Salesforce called the Customer Success Plan. Underneath that, there may be like 7 or 8 related objects. So we may have like 10 objects that we manage. We care about them. We're in there every day. No other team in Salesforce is really actively managing those records. So we've been given delegated administration to create our own fields, our own pick lists, all that kind of stuff. And so we do. So as you can imagine, there's lots of different kinds of requests that we get. You could consider that some of those requests general maintenance requests. And maybe they have nothing to do with those 10 objects that we manage. Then there's those team-specific requests that have everything to do with those 10 objects that we manage. And things that are more like application development, which get beyond either of those first 2 things. And you can see that we get those requests from both our end users, our direct constituents on our team, as well as the managers who come by with a drive-by. Hey, we really need to get this process in there. Can you make it happen? Right? So one of the ways that we do this is we've kind of triaged the kinds of requests into the minor and the major. And the minor requests, actually everything we do, both those general requests that could have anything to do with what you need done, and that could even include things like, my BlackBerry isn't working, I need to get a printer installed, my VPN isn't connecting, I've got an HR problem with my benefits. Everything in Salesforce that needs any kind of support all goes through cases through our intranet. We log all those cases here, all support types handled in one place, using the pick list values and the native functionality of the app to help ensure data quality. Another cool thing that we do is as you choose the kinds of requirements that you have for your change requests, it will pull those requests dynamically into a sort of subform. Right? So that change there, or that form there changes every time you select something different, so that we always know what questions to answer when we're, say, supplying a request to IT. And then assignment rules take those cases and assign them to the right owner. So in my case, I only get cases, and I actually get cases, if they are related to our instance of Salesforce and they have to do with something that I manage. Otherwise, they go straight to the administrative team for them to process the request. And one of the key things I was mentioning in an earlier slide about the need for communication and transparency, it's built right into the platform. You use cases, and you can use workflow automation to alert your end users who are asking you to do these things, hey, it's done, or using comments to communicate with them as you're getting it done. And then, so those are for those immediate change requests and the minor change requests. But what about the major change requests, those pie-in-the-sky kinds of ideas? Well, we leverage, again, our own app. We use ideas as a way of collecting. You can even see we've created a CSM community just for our team, our 80 people within the organization, and the kinds of things our team cares about. Now, there are similar communities within our version of Salesforce for things like employee success and job satisfaction, environmental friendliness and stuff. We've got all kinds of ideas. But in our case, we use this one specific to our team to manage these ideas. And just like on the Idea Exchange where you all log ideas and vote on them for our product roadmap, they're kind of doing this for us, for the CSM product roadmap, so to speak, right? The most popular ideas rise to the top. We're able to use those status tags like it's in progress or it's been completed, et cetera, again, to communicate back to our constituency, where do we stand with these ideas that they're throwing to us to act on. And of course, just like the comments on cases, we can use the comments on ideas to show the details of what we're working on. Another thing that we do is we use a governance process with bi-weekly meetings with representation from, we have like a field group and a corporate group and an automation group within customer success. All 3 of those teams are represented in this bi-weekly meeting. So this is like our miniature center of excellence, right? Those 3 teams are all represented, plus we have a champion from our executive management team who joins that call, and it's kind of our voice back to executive management for the big things. And we use a Google Doc to manage all those things. We keep all of our agendas for what we're going to cover in those bi-weekly meetings in here. We keep a list of all the roadmap things that we are working on, trying to prioritize, and the status of all those things, any open action items that we're working on, and even sometimes little projects, like we're currently working on a project to rationalize all the fields that have been developed on those 10 custom objects I was talking about, and get them down to the ones that we actually use. So we've got a tab just dedicated to rationalizing those fields on this thing. And we have made this document visible to everybody in the entire company. Again, communication, transparency. But we also have control, because the only people who can edit it are the people on our control team. So it's just another way that we communicate back to everyone, let people know what we're doing. So just to quickly run down what our process looks like, the first thing we ask is this change a major change or not? And if it's not a major change, we have them write a case. Just log a case to get it done. The next question is it part of the customer success plan, or the CSP? If the answer is no, then it goes straight to John's team, and our system administrators process the request. If it does have to do with that customer success plan, again, those 10 objects that our CSMs manage, and it's one of those immediate types of requests, we just do it, because we've got delegated administration right, and we can manage our own objects. And if it's one of those minor changes that might have a greater impact than just that individual, it goes to that biweekly review meeting that I was just talking about. And as long as there's approval, or if there's no approval, we take no action, right? If that team says, no, I'm not going to do it, doesn't make sense, or it's lower in the priority list, end of story. If it is approved, again, we've got those delegated administration rights, and we do it. So then what about the major changes? Well, if it's a major request, then we send people to log that idea on the idea exchange, because we want to make sure that that major request is popular with the other people in our team. If it's not popular, again, no action. But if it is popular, again, we're going to take it to that biweekly review team. We don't just do these major actions. We always take it to that team, again, prioritize it before we take any action. And I should mention at this point that drive-by that I was mentioning, the executives that come by and say, hey, we really need to do this, great idea, we will not only review that in our biweekly meeting, but we'll also log that as an idea on the idea exchange, so that as we're working on it, everybody else who might be interested in that project can see the progress of it. And then, so lastly, if the type of change is major like this, it's no longer something that we can do as delegated administrators. It goes to our development team. And so with that, I want to bring up Randy Edgar, who manages that team, and he can talk about where we take things from there. Now, I should also mention, as Randy's coming up to the stage, that we have a fairly complex process, because we, as you saw from that first slide, have a lot of things going on in the app. That process I just showed you may be enough for you, particularly if you've got an organization of, say, 100 users and you don't have a really complex deployment. That may be enough. But if you've got that kind of thing that requires more advanced processes and triaging, then the next two segments are really going to speak to you. Ready?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Guru. Okay. So Randy Edgar, Director of IT Product Management. My team is responsible for much of the delivery within our instance of Salesforce. So just by a show of hands, how many folks in the room are actually responsible for delivery and have downstream customers? Okay, most of the folks. Okay, so we have similar positions in our companies, right? So what I wanted to do today is talk about, Drew talked a lot about the actual request process, so let's talk about, double click on that and show downstream how we come up with the solution and how we manage change and how we do a little bit of development, and then John's going to talk about the actual deployment process of that, okay? So let me know if this is familiar, because a lot of folks, when we do roadshows and talk about our change management process, it sounds very familiar to your change management issues, which are like, how do I request this change, and how long is this going to take, and really, does it really take that long, and when's it going live, and my project's more important than that project, and I need this done right away, or this executive is asking for it. Does this sound familiar at all? Mm-hmm. Same thing happens at Salesforce, right? So we came up with a change management philosophy that goes through these goals, and the goals are predictability, especially on on-time delivery, right? Frequency, meaning incremental releases. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but we use the agile development methodology that ensures that we have change going into the system as soon as it's ready to go, right? This is the opposite of the Big Bang or waterfall approach. So I'm going to get into this a little bit on some future slides here. So repeatability, we heard often that change processes was different for different operations groups. So we went to a repeatable model. We want to make sure that we are handling corporate-wide priority, not just priority for individual groups. And the last thing, and I think one of the most important, is transparency, to make sure that from a delivery standpoint that you own, you are completely transparent to the quote-unquote business about what's going on, what's expected, what's the priority, when it's going to get delivered, and how that delivery is actually going. And we're going to show you some of the tools that we use to manage that entire process. So Drew showed this slide. I want to double click on it and show it from my perspective. And that is, so for each operations group, we have what's called a scrum team or a delivery team that manages that operations group, right? So that scrum team is made up of product managers that are solution architects, made up of developers that actually do Apex, Visualforce, Force.com platform development, QA folks, right, and then scrum masters or project managers, right? Those teams all are associated to one individual operations group, right? And they're responsible for their own priorities and their own deliveries, okay? So Drew touched on this a little bit, but I want to go in a little bit more detail, and that is, how many folks in the room have a change management process where you batch up all the changes at once, minor or major, and go live on like a weekly or a monthly basis? Okay. How often? Monthly? Weekly? Monthly. Monthly. And that includes adding a field. Monthly. Okay. So we don't go through that approach, and I recommend not going through that approach unless you have resource constraints, obviously. But if you don't, here's the process that we do, and Drew talked about this a little bit. So any minor change request, and what we say is minor are these things up here, right? So that can include fields, page layouts, related lists, data loading of data, validation rules, assignment rules, workflow rules, that sort of thing. Once it's approved from the operations group and once it's approved from the support team, is actually put in to production immediately, right? So we do this so that, Drew didn't mention this, but all 3,800 people at Salesforce can request change in the application. Everybody. Which is sort of different than how many companies work change management. But we do that because everybody uses the application. So if you use it, you can request a change, but as long as it's funneled through an operations group and then the support on-demand team, then it goes live, right? And we, by the way, get 650 requests a month for change within just this application. We actually have other applications that we manage, other processes, but we have 650 requests, right? So it's quite a lot. But this team that's up front here is churning through those every day. So great work by this team. So the major requests, so the second bucket is any code, so anything on the Force.com platform, App Exchange applications, custom objects, and any solution that takes more than 3 hours to deliver. Those we deliver monthly, right? Assuming it gets prioritized. So this shows the process. So that first one with delegated admin goes from requester to the ops lead, like someone like Drew, immediately in. The minor change request without delegated admin goes from requester, ops lead to operational support. And then the deploy monthly is requester to the ops lead, if approved and prioritized, to the scrum team, and then on to operational support. The key here, again, is that minor changes, once the impact analysis is done, right, to determine whether or not this is going to impact anything, should go in immediately. Okay? So how we manage that in process for the major, those App Exchange apps and Force.com platform changes, is that we use the adaptive delivery methodology, a form of Agile. So the way this works is that the request comes in and it's managed on what we call a backlog. Backlog is just a list of requests or projects. Okay? Every month, each Scrum team takes a look at the priority of those and picks those for the sprint backlog or that monthly release. That's what they're going to build, and they communicate that back to the business. And then that process happens every month, right? So we have a delivery every month. And then at the end of that month, we work internally with our team and the business team about what went right and what went wrong, because Agile's really all about improving every time, right? So I want to talk a little bit about how we actually manage this process, this Agile process, and I want to show you in a demo. So we wanted to manage this entire process and go back to the goals that I talked about at the beginning, especially about transparency. So we wanted an application to be able to give that transparency and manage those processes. And we needed a development platform to be able to do that, and a CRM application, and we looked far and wide, but we got a really good price from Salesforce. So we decided to use our own tool for this methodology. So this is what we call ScrumForce. This is our own internal application that we use to manage the process. So each team, like I talked about, has their own tab here. And we use, you can see up these sub-tabs. I don't know if you've seen this before. This is a good use of Visualforce here, where you see team information, product backlog. I actually recommend doing this on your account page layout, just because it's a way to bubble up a lot of the information up top so that you don't have to go all the way down to below or use the hover tags. Great use of Visualforce. So how this works is that and by the way, I should say, we had some network problems yesterday, so I'm sort of mocking up this demo, not clicking through, but you'll see how this works, is that we have the product backlog here. So this is every request that comes in from the intranet or from ideas or what have you, gets managed in this process. So each month, we choose a sprint backlog. So these are all the items that we are going to take on for that particular month. All right, and we're communicating back. And by the way, this is the delivery team. The business or the requester has access to this, so they see exactly what we've signed up for. Okay, and most importantly, they contribute to what we call the user story. The user story is the project, and it's project details. Right, so it gives ideas about the actual story that we're talking about or the requirement. We use this fancy Visualforce here to just show a little index card because that's Agile methodology is all about index and sticky notes, which I'll show you in a second. But it's a way for them to clearly tell us what is required of the project. And then also it gives a place for acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria allows us to know when we do testing, how do we know that we've passed testing, right? So we get all the details possible from our business partners so that there's no questions, right? We know exactly what's to do. And if we have like business requirements document, those are attached as well that help our product managers follow that up. So when we get into an actual sprint, so part of what I talked about was transparency. So we actually show all the tasks for that particular project, and then how we're doing with those tasks, whether or not we're going to hit it or not, throughout the month. Complete transparency of how we're doing. A really good use of using Visualforce to share information with other folks that in your business partners. We also, for those of you who do know Agile development methodology, it's all about sticky notes and how we're doing and have we started it, and if we have started it, then we move it on our board, and if we're in QA, then we move it on our board. We actually use that using Visualforce as well, right? So we actually are able to take I think I'm offline here, so I apologize. But we're able to change the tasks here about how many hours are left in that task. I think I'm offline. And then move them on. Yeah, there we go. And then move those on. So if this is planned and I'm working on it, that moves over to in progress, and then when I'm completed. So great use of the Force.com platform to be able to manage change. And then, again, this is all transparent to the business as well. Because you're using the Force.com and Salesforce, then all the reporting is done through dashboards as well. So then all your the internal team, the developers, the QA, as well as your business partners can use reports and dashboards just the same way they do in your CRM application, which is fantastic. So that is a good look of how we actually manage that change. Screenshots. And now I will kick it on over to John Beatty, who will talk about the actual deployment of that process. Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Beatty. I'm Senior Director of IT Application Support. And I'm going to try to bring it home and talk about the underlying IT rules and processes that we put in place that make this whole process sort of come together. I want to go back to the slide that both Randy and Drew showed at the beginning, and I've changed it a little bit to sort of give a representation of where my team sits in relationship to the production org, where we're actually moving all of these great features and applications that Randy and Drew have built. Just really quickly about my team, almost all of them are sitting up here making funny faces at me. So if you have any actual technical questions about what we talk about, these are really good resources, and they'd be happy to talk to you afterwards. I have a staff of 8 full-time employees, 4,500 users supported in the app. We have over 50 installed applications, and based on all the work that Drew and Randy are giving us, we deploy over 20 major releases a month. In addition to that, we're also supporting end users and resolving about 2,000 cases a month from end users on the production applications. So the important thing I wanted to show about this slide in terms of how the people are organized is 2 things. One is that my team, administration and support, acts as the gatekeeper to all major changes that go into the Salesforce production org. And you can see sort of how there's a funnel effect in this slide that shows you basically that for big changes, for risky changes, we want those to move down and go only through our team as gatekeeper. We try to make that a funnel and not a roadblock, but it's a careful balance. All right. So why change control from an IT perspective? Our team is looking primarily at implementing rules that satisfy 3 things. First, stability of our production org. New features and new applications are important and are required to evolve our business, but we do not want to jeopardize the existing features in the org. So it's one of our main responsibilities to make sure that we don't do that when we deploy new functionality. Second of all, we need to be able to support everything that is brought into the production org. We need to be able to find bugs, fix the bugs, help end users understand how to use the product. And finally, since Salesforce is a publicly traded company, we are bound by Sarbanes-Oxley, and that means we have to prove compliance with documented controls that establish the integrity of the data in our system. All right, so basically I tried to boil down the kinds of rules and processes that we have in place into 5 main categories. And those are segregation of duties, managed release process, documentation approval, and independent review, and audit for compliance. And I'm going to go through briefly each one of these steps and sort of tell the story from the standpoint of a major application that Randy's team would implement. And for those kind of applications, we use all 5 of these elements to make sure that we're doing the right thing. For smaller changes, updating some profiles, things like that, we only use a subset of the controls, just the segregation of duties, documentation and approval, and audit. All right. The most foundational element to making sure that you can enforce change control is segregation of duties. And basically what that means is that developers who are building new code and new enhancements for the application do not have the permissions to move that code into production. That creates a hard wall between development and production and allows our team to be the gatekeeper for what goes into production. And implementation of that is actually fairly simple. The only people in our company who have 3 key permissions are on my team: customize app, manage users, and author apex. So I can't really talk about segregation of duties without going back a little bit to delegated admin, because really what delegated admin does is it allows us to delegate out of our team and onto ops teams the ability to make changes themselves. And when we do that, basically what we're saying is we are going to bypass our standard change control processes and give more power to the business to get the job done that they need to get done as quickly as possible. Our philosophy in our group is that wherever possible, we actually want to give delegated admin, because folks like Drew are much closer to the needs of his organization, and he can implement the smaller configuration changes that get his team working faster if he has the power to do that. So our default position would be we would love to give delegated admin in all situations, but also reduce the number of tickets that my team has to deal with every week. But we don't do that when one of four things is true. When the change is going to affect a company policy or is required to be controlled by Sarbanes-Oxley. We don't delegate admin when the object involved is used in an integration, and that integration could fail if a delegated administrator made a change to that object. We don't delegate admin when the business team that wants the administration doesn't have a certified administrator, so we can't be confident that they're actually going to know what to do with that power when they have it. And finally, when we have competing units who all need support for the same object, that's a real good business case for a separate, well-staffed support team to take on the role of doing support for those objects. And just really quickly, for those of you that aren't familiar with the level of detail that you can get into on what you delegate in terms of delegated admin, this is the delegated admin screen in our app. And it allows you to get fairly detailed about what you will and won't give power to do outside of your core operations group. You can provide the ability for delegated admins to log in as one of their users. You can delegate the ability to create users, and you can then define what roles and subordinates and what profiles those users that have been created have access to. And then finally, you can delegate object administration, adding fields, changing page layouts, things like that. For Sarbanes-Oxley and for our most used orgs, the only kind of delegated admin that we give out would be for those custom objects, so that folks like Drew can handle keeping his applications current for his users' needs. We don't delegate user administration or permissions because those will all have to be audited for SOX compliance, and so we want to make sure we can maintain control over that process. All right, so you've set up your segregation of duties, and this has allowed you, just using permissions in the app, to control what gets changed and who changes it. The next thing then is to talk about a managed release process. And this slide really falls closest into Randy's team to manage, but we rely on it in support and operations to ensure that the code that we're getting is actually code that's ready to deploy. We follow this is not, rocket science. This is a very basic development framework here, so a lot of you are probably pretty familiar with it. Initial development for new code for an application that we're going to release into our production environment starts out being developed in a config-only sandbox, and basically what that means is a separate instance of Salesforce where we've copied the metadata from our production org, but not any of the actual data, and that basically gives the developer the right context in which to build his code or her code, and basically that they can rev code, try out things, iterate until they get the right thing that's ready to actually be tested by our QA department. At that point, the developer checks the code into Perforce, which is a source control management system, and then they begin the process of actually configuring the testing environment for final QA testing. The full copy sandbox obviously should be as close to the live environment as possible to make the integrity of the tests as high as possible. At the time that the test environment is set up from an operations standpoint, one of the most important things that the developer does is build a run list. And that is literally a task list that goes line by line through everything that has to be changed in the order it has to be changed, so that when we're done, the application in production does what it's supposed to do. QE then does their tests, and the deployment run list is validated by my team, and it's now time to go through the final checkpoints before we go to release. So the third thing in terms of change control is documenting what you're putting into your production application. So again, here we use our own application to do this documentation and provide the final review. This cutout here is basically a case of a special record type called a change control record type, and in it we ask the change requester to document some key information that we need to evaluate the change for readiness. The main things being a risk assessment, how much of the existing how much of the existing features in the org are going to be affected by this change, how many users are going to be affected, is downtime or locking users out of the org going to be required in order to make this deployment. We also look for documented approvals. From QA, we want to know that all the testing passed. From the business lead, someone like Drew, we want to know that the thing that we built actually does what they need it to do. And then finally, someone from my team, IT operations, will approve to note that we understand the run list and that we have the staffing to actually do the deployment. All right, so we've got this fairly well-oiled machine that's brought us up to the point where we're ready to go live with some code. We have what we call our IT Change Advisory Board, which meets once a week and reviews all major changes that go into the app before we actually go live. And there are 4 voting members of that group, representing sort of the 4 key pillars of our IT department. Architecture, not including Randy's group. Randy's group is definitely a pillar, but he's provided us with all this information, and now we need IT architecture, application support, infrastructure, and information security to say, yes, this is a stable, secure application. It meets our business requirements, and we will allow it to go live. The board meets once a week. We report every change that's in ready status. The change requester stands before the board or sits before the board and basically we ask questions, and they give us all the information that we need, and we either approve or deny the request to go live. That's a weekly meeting. There are times when we need to do changes much faster, typically around bug fixes. So we do have a separate emergency change process where we can get a change done from the moment we found a bug to the time that we go live in maybe 4 hours. All right, so I'm going to go back now up to the managed release process because we're now ready to move the code into production. And we basically break down that run list that we've been given by the developer into 3 major areas. The first are pre-deploy tasks. Those are low-risk configuration changes that are not actually dependent on the new objects that we're moving into the org. We do those in advance so that we can save our deploy window to focus on the hard technical work that's related to the actual deploy. We then do the actual deployment, and for that we use Perforce, which is our source control tool, and then we use the Apache Ant client and for the Force.com migration tool. One thing to note here is we do not use Eclipse for live deploys. We were bitten a couple times in the past using Eclipse where the wrong button was pushed, and instead of 3 pieces of Apex code on one object being deployed, every piece of Apex code that was on the developer's machine ended up all over our org. And once that happened we stopped using Eclipse for our live deploys. We use Ant because it allows us to describe line by line exactly what code we're going to deploy and where we're going to deploy it. And then once we've got the code in place, we then do all of the post-deploy configuration tasks, that setting up new profiles, creating the right visibility for the right kinds of users and things like that. All right, so the last note, and I'm not going to talk about this for too long, but it is important because processes work most effectively when people know that they're accountable for their part of that process. So we use audits, both within our team and by an external independent auditor, to make sure that we are following all of those rules that I just went over. We also check the setup audit trail on a regular basis to make sure somehow someone didn't get permission and is secretly adding new applications to the org that we don't know about. And we do a quarterly review of all user permissions across the org. That's really to enforce the segregation of duties, make sure we know who has the power to do what, and that those responsibilities meet all of our company policies. So those are the 5 key elements of change control. I'm going to hand it back over to Drew, and then we do have some time for questions and answers.
Thanks, John. Okay, so just to wrap things up, here are some of the key takeaways from our session today. One is to really consider that there are lots of different ways or lots of different kinds of changes that you're going to be asked to make, and that probably makes sense to tailor your processes to those changes, to the level of security that's required and to the level of efforts required, and to have a process that allows you to give speed to the things that can be and should be done immediately, and control to the things that need a little bit more process reinforcement. The second key takeaway is to empower your teams. The operational leads that maybe can be given the power to do some of this stuff themselves, let them handle the sort of low-level tasks and things that they're the closest to and know the best anyway, so that you can funnel your resources to the more complex tasks that require that more managed release process. Consider that there are many, many tools that are available straight out of Salesforce and a couple of these partner applications that can be helpful to you in this process. That can be things as simple as the cases and ideas functionality that exists right in the app, some of these developer tools like Eclipse and Ant and Perforce, as well as consider building your own custom apps. I see Matt Evans in the office, in the audience here, and one of our customers who actually developed their own product roadmap application inside of Salesforce, and we're managing all of their products and their roadmap configurations right inside the app. So consider doing that yourself. Keep track of all your projects, all your roadmap items, and so forth. Lastly, mitigate those risks with a separation of duty, particularly if you have to comply with SOX. And document and communicate all the changes that you're making so that everyone always knows what you're up to and isn't duplicating the requests. Some of the resources that are available to you, we always like to push you back towards help and training, because a lot of times people ask me for advice. One of the first things I'll do is look at our own help and training. A lot of stuff is in there. You can also find a great deal of resources in salesforce.com/community, where you will find, among other things, that's good. Thanks. Among other things, all the Dreamforce presentations that have been done in years past, they're all archived there in the best practices section of our community site. So you'll be able to find many, many useful resources there for change management. And in particular, there's a really great one called Best Practices for CRM Change Management that was done a couple of years ago. Highly recommend that you check out that one. You can also find great resources on the developer side from our developer site, and of course, AppExchange partners that can help out on the AppExchange. And before we go into the Q&A section, you've probably seen this slide as often as you have the Safe Harbor one. Please fill out the online survey. We are going green this year and eliminating the paper that you've completed in years past. There's both a kiosk up in Moscone North where you can fill these things out online, or you can go through your login from Dreamforce and also complete your surveys and questionnaires there. It is really important that you do this because your feedback helps us to make these sessions better and better each year. So with that, now I'll open up the floor for questions. If you do have any questions, we invite you to come up to the microphone so that we can hear the questions that you have, since this is being recorded. Yes?
Great job, guys. Very informative. Thanks for the shout-out, Drew. So one of the hardest things that we have is with our cross-functional steering committee trying to prioritize all of the projects and changes that come into place. And so you have your Google spreadsheet up there, and I saw A, B, and C in the order that you were going to do them in. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works? Is that based on staffing and scheduling? Is it based on ROI for the individual projects? Is it based on, how do you come up with that prioritization?
That's a great question. So in terms of the roadmap of questions or of projects, the sort of major projects that we've got, the first thing that informs the priority is where is it on the idea exchange. So the most popular ideas are bubbling to the top. And so the ones that our user base are saying, hey, we really, really want you to do that, those tend to get highest up on our list. The other factor that we weigh into that is what are our executives asking for? Because if our executives say, hey, this is a strategic project, it aligns to our Customers for Life program, for example, that one's going to take a lot of priority as well. And then the third element is we're meeting as a group, and we discuss these things, and we all make sure that we're in agreement about that, and we'll move things up and down the priority level accordingly. And sometimes there are factors of whether we can even do it right now, because sometimes there are some delimiting factors. For example, we are now in the process of getting rid of a bunch of fields, consolidating a bunch of record types, and we can't do the record type consolidation project until we do the field deletion project. So sometimes there are some limiting factors like that.
Let me add to that as well. So at the beginning of the year, Mark has his objective, management by objectives, right? So those all trickle down. But in order to choose the right projects, especially if they're coming in from multiple different teams, we usually go back to that, right? Where does it fit on that, what we call V2MOM or the MBO list, right? Because if it's not there, then it's probably not of enough priority.
I could also say that we have, as I was mentioning a little earlier, a member of the management team on our review board. And whenever we're on the fence about something, we'll always say, hey, can you weigh in on this? Can you take this back to the executive management team, get their buy-in and approval or their thoughts on this if we're ever on the fence?
So if I understood the chart correctly, it looked like you guys have, I think, Randy, on your team, people dedicated to every part of the business. So you have a QA, a developer, a BA, say, all kind of each aligned to a business unit. So you do handle every business unit's request. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to you don't face the situation often, I think, of cross-functional prioritization.
So yeah, that's a good question. So we used to. We actually just reorganized into that model where there was a Scrum team for every business unit. Before that, it was one product owner who was responsible for overall priority of every single team. That was me. So that's where things like your question about how do you pick throughout that entire organization. I mean, there's something from support, there's something from services, there's a request from marketing, there's one from sales. How do we know, right? That was my responsibility, right? And it really went back to Mark's objectives, right? And if it doesn't map to those objectives, it's probably not of high enough priority, right?
So, and in the new model, now every major business unit has a Scrum team to get dedicated to them. That allows us to push up closer to the business some of that guidance for within that business unit, what do they want done. But at a high resource level, Mark's V2MOMs also affect the staffing of each of those teams. So if we're really focusing on customer retention this year, you'll find that Scrum team probably has a few more resources on it than another Scrum team.
And to get back to your question as well, part of the Agile methodology in the monthly releases allows you to be a little bit more flexible to say no, right? Because it's not no entirely, it's no this month, right? And when we reprioritize next month, perhaps that request will be on the list and perhaps it won't. But the monthly iterative releases and reprioritization really helps that.
Randy, could you also mention or talk to the way that we've structured those various Scrum teams in terms of things like orders to cash or need to knowledge and what you did in terms of reorganizing the IT teams along those buckets?
Sure, yeah. There are different, we organize it as far as processes are concerned. So we have a team that's responsible for campaign to lead, and the product owner is sitting right over here. For lead to opportunity, and the product owner is also sitting right over here. And we have, but it's basically one for each, for sales, for support, for services, for finance, for HR, and then multiple for things like order to cash, quote to order. Those are each individual Scrum teams that have business units that they are responsible for.
And I really like the move towards focusing the team on a whole business process, because that requires them to not just to think about how this application request fits in with this department, but how it's going to fit in with all the downstream impact as well. That makes it easier for us to support, and it makes smarter decisions along the way, I think.
I have a question here. In your landscape, I noticed there is no staging area. So usually in our system, we use a staging area for performance tests and also for if we want to have the infrastructure, major, say, database upgrades, we use staging as a mock go-live process and for the SOX compliance. But I notice in your landscape, I don't see that piece.
So the question is, how do we handle a staging area in this model? Mm-hmm. You want to take it?
Yeah, so we use a full copy environment basically for staging. I've seen some companies that we only have one of those. Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about this to the details, but we have like 6 or 7 config in one full copy environment. So we use that full copy environment as the staging environment.
Okay, so you do all your performance testing, stress testing over there.
We do that testing in there, yeah.
So, and those are just sandboxes. I believe you can get a sandbox provision for you for any org that you're working on, and we just designate one as a staging sandbox and one as a development sandbox, and then we can apply that, migrate from one to the next. Now, we're getting better and better tools for actually migrating from one environment, but for right now, what we really have to do, migration means pull the code out of our source control system, move it into a new environment, and then manually do the configuration around it based on that documented run list that we build through the process.
And it should also be mentioned that that full copy sandbox environment is something that people in my role as an operations lead have access to. And if I'm doing something that I want to pass on to Randy's team, I may model it myself and say, this is the kind of thing I'm looking for in some cases. Oh, and by the way, I also wanted to just explain one of those acronyms that we were throwing up a few minutes ago, this V2MOM. That's internal Salesforce speak for vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures. And it's our strategic planning tool for aligning everyone from Mark Benioff down to the entry level. Everyone in our company subscribes to that same methodology for goal planning for the year. And everyone's goal setting lines up to Mark's. So all the things that he's got in his high-level thing developed with the President's Committee, all of his managers are coming up with theirs for their patches that line up and support that vision. So we have alignment throughout the company. And I would stress that from a customer success manager's perspective. As I'm talking with all my customers, I'm always encouraging them to do the same thing. If you want adoption with the platform that you're putting together in CRM, make sure that your deployment of Salesforce supports your corporate goals and that all of your reporting and metrics and so forth aligns with your corporate vision, values, etc.
So, how often do you guys refresh your sandboxes?
Good question.
Yes, I'm going to give that one to
Yeah.
Ayala.
Do you want-
She's the manager
you
of
wanna
the
come
team
on
down
up
here.
and talk about that?
She hates speaking in groups, so that's why I'm asking her.
Can you speak to the microphone? You maybe want to come up to the podium.
Come on up.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's only me, Pete, Ayana.
Thanks. So we do the config only sandboxes monthly for each of the different Scrum teams and the full copy quarterly. There you go.
And what do you do if there's testing in progress and you hit that monthly time when you're supposed to refresh?
So we do a lot of communication to the various groups that are UATing the development work that we're doing. Sometimes we push those refreshes out slightly, and sometimes we push forward with the refreshes, depending on where they are in their testing cycle.
But if each Scrum team has their own sandbox, then they can refresh at their own schedule, which is also nice.
I think we have time for one more question if we have any. Do we have any more questions?
Another question. You said that you push out your small changes upon approval. How do you handle training and communication for the new fields, pick list values, all of that, if they're going out instantly into the application or any time they get approved?
So the question is about how do you communicate and train on the things that are being released with each release. So that's probably kind of a two-part question. Do you
Start with how you do it on your team.
Okay, great. So some of our things we just do as just a quick email, right? If it's a really minor change, it's like oh, by the way, there's a new field. Here's what it's for. We also support a lot of that by using the help text so that when they see that new field, they just hover over it and they see what it's for. But if there are things that are more major than that, we do webinars with the CSM team, for example. And sometimes they're spot webinars that we put on just to announce this new more advanced functionality or what have you. And sometimes we do them as part of our weekly team training, right? So we'll do that as a webinar. We'll record it. We'll archive that recording on content, which you all now get for free. And then anyone can always go back and download that training session themselves. So that's primarily the way that we archive all that.
Yeah, so we just have this rule that the requester for change, once it funnels into that operations group is then responsible for communication out. And they have lots of different methods, either email, webinar, what have you, or maybe it's so minor you had a pick list that we don't actually communicate that out, unless it's a change in process.
And for the big changes in the CAB form, for that final review that we do, one of the line items is what's the communication and training plan that you plan to roll out at the time that we release the application. We also internally, in that handoff process between the testing and going live, Ayala has requirements for training both for our team so that we know all of the functionality that's going in there, and we will also help drive requests for training materials for end users because the better trained the end users are, the less support tickets we're going to get on basic functionality.
Well, thank you very much for attending our session. I hope you have a fantastic Dreamforce and safe travels back to wherever you are. Thanks.